Garfield has always been in the video game scene all the way back to the original Apple II computer and the Commodore 64 game console, all the way to getting his own karting and party games and his most recent releases totally biting Mario's style. Hey ma, I want some Mario. We got Mario at home, honey. Mario at home be like. Regardless of Garfield's many expenditures into our living rooms in the 90s and early 2000s, there was one Garfield game that stood out to me amongst the rest when I was a kid. It was two Garfield games technically that were being hosted on a website full of Garfield flash games known as Garfield.com. Among the other simple flash games were two fleshed out Garfield horror point and clicks known as Garfield's Scary Scavenger Hunt 1 and 2, Donuts of Doom. Looking from afar, the games might not seem like that much and seem to fit the bill of a cheap Garfield flash game, but when we pop the hood on these strange flash games, we can find a few themes that are genuinely creepy, especially when I was a kid. The first game originated as a way of promoting the Perfection Pastries brand, which was a real-life pastry brand that is now defunct, but Garfield is essentially scavenging the haunted house for these delicious pastries. A pretty good advertisement, I'd say, as they must be really fucking good if old Field here is willing to go through this much for a couple sweets. Problem was, the main player base for these games were kids who were bored on a Saturday because they played their 1600th lap of Mario Kart and you can't be fucked to do another, and so they aren't exactly picking up on the fact that this was a real brand, or at least I didn't when I was a kid, so I don't know if this ended up selling a lot. Maybe it did work with a few people because they do end up using real PNGs of their products in the game, and I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't eat these a little faded at 2 a.m., but only if I skipped dinner earlier that night, only if. With the reasoning behind the game's existence being a sly advertisement for a few baker's dozens, let's dive into what makes these games so impactful for those who played it back in the day. This game had more staying power with kids than their own parents' divorces back in the day, so I'd like to dedicate this video to anyone who braved the scary mansion of Garfield, and let's all reminisce on what made it so damn creepy. Garfield and horror go pretty hand in hand if you've been on the internet for the past few years, as the character has kind of had a branching path of relevance, one being in the mainstream where he is still grinding away at that old Hollywood scene with TV shows and movies, whilst the polar opposite on the internet is happening where he is being treated like an ancient yokai being that slowly stalks his owner, John. What the hell's going on? What happened? We even have an indie horror game that falls into an analog horror type of genre, but back in the day, finding a scary Garfield product was a pretty hard task. You know, you'd have to peel the eyelids back on your grandma's Garfield telephone to get scared by this dude. So when me and my brother stumbled across this game in the early 2000s, it was intriguing just due to the different environment for Garfield we hadn't yet seen for the character. This was also one of my first experiences with a point-and-click game, and this being my first exposure to one, I think it really helped me appreciate this genre of game in the coming years. It's a very simple click and find, usually consisting of completing simple puzzles like spelling Garfield's name correctly. In order to be awarded one of these 7 sweets, you need to complete his quest. There are a few items you need to unlock other areas, like these colored keys in the first game, but for the most part, it's a very straightforward go find the sweets and get the fuck out type of game. The main way to lose the game is similar to older Scooby-Doo games, if you're familiar, in which you have a jump scare meter you have to manage, as if it gets maxed out, Garfield will end up running tail between his legs before you finish the scavenger hunt. Right off the bat, when you load into the game, you are immediately met with a loud, sharp, ambient wind track, which still sends chills down my spine today. And get ready to hear a lot of it because it's the only consistent backing track throughout both games. Yeah, both of them have this. When you start, you'll load in at the front of the mansion the game takes place in with a locked front door, and when walking left, you will run into a familiar face, John Arbuckle. There he is. Except this time, he isn't his usual bored self as we know him in the comics, as he is pretty visibly shook here, even looking over his shoulder a lot. Clicking on him will give you different tips, including one featuring John's friend Lyman, who says that he likes muffins. It's pretty random, but this will be important later on, but just remember that John knows a lot about the mansion, mansion, so off-rip John just seems a little bit sketchy. He always did to me in these games. After obtaining the key from the chest on the front doorstep, like I said, pretty easy click and find game here, the player now has access to the mansion which most of the game takes place in. It's a rather large mansion with several rooms and a couple floors with an attic and a basement. This makes for a great urban exploration type of feeling. When you enter the doors, you have no idea what will be in the next room, and the way the camera just jump cuts into the room always made me a bit fearful to enter the next dark room. What's lying around the corner? Is it gonna be Odie fucking with his ears chopped off? The mansion is all but empty, as you'll quickly find that the game developers made sure to litter the mansion with creepy things to see and interact with in the background, like these suits of armor for example, and these really creepy old photos of Garfield hanging on the walls. Other than your typical haunted house jump scares you can experience here, like ghosts and ghouls, the first game has a few disturbing moments that stuck out to me as a kid. Take, for example, the sheet room in the upstairs, in which you have to pick the right sheet to get the donuts, which are hiding under it, except there is no way to know which one it's under, so it's a matter of elimination, meaning you'll have to endure a few of the jump scares before you get the right one. Don't get me wrong, it's not like any of these would scare me at all nowadays, that is, except for one. The leftmost sheet will reveal a disembodied head that wakes up and scares the player before going back under the sheet. This isn't just anyone either, as it's classic Garfield character Lyman, John's friend from the early days of the Garfield comic strip, and original owner of Odie the dog, fun fact. This isn't the only time he's seen in the mansion either, but this is definitely the darkest. I mean, he's just a head, looking like some Game of Thrones shit happened here. There's been a lot of speculation as to where Lyman went, as after being introduced, he was strangely missing from the Garfield comic strip and any other Garfield canon material, leading many to believe the worst for this character Lyman. It also doesn't help that during an anniversary event, Garfield creator Jim Davis stated in a slew of other answers to the "Where's Lyman?" question, stated, "Don't look in John's basement." He'd later state that that was just a joke, a little gaffe, but it was too late and theorists started to put the pieces together. Then this game came out and gave even more support to the idea that something bad happened to Lyman, because why the fuck are we finding his severed head in a random room in a mansion, or another version of him chilling in a tub a 2:15? Much less his disembodied head being hidden under a white sheet as if someone were hiding evidence. Listen, it's strange to say the least, but this isn't the last time where you run into Lyman in this game, or in this house, as another clone of Lyman, or perhaps the true Lyman, has yet to even show himself. Back on the ground floor, you will find one of the harder puzzles in the game, in which you need to put a shelf of books in alphabetical order in order to open the hidden entrance to the basement. Once in here, you will find that this is where the mansion's furnace is, along with cells? Who was being held prisoner down here? Why are there prison cells down here? Is this why this was being blocked off by a hidden bookshelf entrance? Exploring more, you will find something that makes the entire mood of the game change. Lyman can be seen hanging from his wrist, chained up on the wall, looking worse for wear. Strange, right? Considering we just ran into Lyman's decapitated head upstairs, and another version of him bathing. Perhaps he's not fully dead, right? We got two versions of him that aren't decapitated. After Lyman begs the player for food, we learn he's probably been down here for a while because he's starving. And remember back to what John said earlier? Lyman likes muffins? So John knew Lyman was down here? This was one of the main examples that fans of Garfield used to suggest that Lyman had met a pretty grisly end, and that's why he wasn't featured in the series anymore, because John decapitated him and then hung his clone up in the cells down below to starve. I don't know, I'm shooting from the hip here. It's got so out of hand that the original creator Jim Davis had to make up a reason that Lyman hadn't returned, originally being that he joined the Peace Corps, which is such an old white man excuse for where a character disappeared to. Yeah, he just joined the fucking Peace Corps. He disappeared, John never saw him again. This was believed to be the case until it was overwritten by even more lore from the Garfield show in season 3, when it's revealed that Lyman actually went to the jungle to photograph an urban legend known as the Zabadoo, and they end up running into Lyman, who turns out to be the Zabadoo in a costume. That's just the short of it. It's quite the episode though. Yeah, it's a strange course for where canonically Lyman ended up, but this game and the scene of Lyman hanging on the wall didn't do anything good for the Lyman theories through the early 2000s. It was a wild time to be a Lyman fan. What am I talking about? Of course, anyone could have told you that a Flash game shouldn't be considered canonical with the rest of the Garfield series, especially one that was made in part to advertise sweets. But it's still extremely strange that this occurs in the game, and I remember feeling like this as a kid. I was convinced that Lyman had even done something messed up to end up in shackles in the basement. But in reality, it seems much darker, and many believe John Arbuckle is behind Lyman's disappearance. However, even this isn't a definitive exit for Lyman, as when you leave the room after giving the muffin to Lyman, he will instantly disappear, leaving just the chains behind in an empty room. This can even be seen since you can usually see into the next room before entering it due to how the camera is set up in the game, and before feeding Lyman you can clearly see him hanging in the room from the room previous, but as soon as exiting he disappears, never to be heard from again. This part always really unnerved me because where the fuck did he go? Did he ascend because he finally got the muffin he's always desired? Was he able to break out of the chains with the strength of Popeye when he eats spinach and busted out of the top of the roof before we even had time to get out of the room? Who knows? All we know is Lyman's story may never be fully finished, and the events that happened in the first scary scavenger hunt still have me looking over my shoulder, John Arbuckle style. But ironically, I'm looking over my shoulder for him. I don't trust this guy. What'd you do to Lyman, dude? A quick addition, post-editing to the Lyman segment I didn't notice until reading more into the actual theories and reviewing the tape, that I realized it appears Lyman is missing his middle finger where he is hung up on the wall in the cell. Now this could just be the fact his finger is like tucked behind the other part of his hands, but if this was intentionally made to be a creepy like small body horror reference to the fact he got his middle fingers chopped off, it's extremely dark, and I thought it was worth noting even if it isn't bluntly stating that Lyman is missing the middle fingers on both hands. What do you guys think about this? Do you think John tortured old Lyman a little bit before he chained him up? This is getting fucked up. The second scary scavenger hunt adventure starts with Garfield stuck in the basement of the mansion, unknown to both Garfield and the player as to how he got there again. From here, you'll need to light the furnace to see around the room in order to access the stairs. In the same section of the yard you fell into in the first game, you now exit from this entrance, and once you reach the outside, you can see this large dog that is blocking Garfield's path into the mansion. He's pretty easily passable by grabbing a bone from the basement, but this is one of the scarier parts of the game for me as a kid. Just something about the dog's design with his literal brain just being out and exposed like he's some sort of twisted failed science experiment always kind of got to me. From here we enter the mansion through the fireplace and we're back in for another round of searching for baked goods. The game developers really took the interactable environments to another level in this game, featuring more things to get jump scared by and just more creepy shit filling out the mansion. Take for example this painting that will change the way the person in the picture is sitting each time you leave the screen, even one where he is no longer sitting there. This is pretty spooky, especially if it catches you by surprise, and even though it seems like a pretty cliche haunted house scare, it works really well here. Another example is the ghost ghoul zombie guy chilling on the armchair in the den. He doesn't do anything besides serve as a small jump scare, but this guy has always kind of spooked me out because I never remembered seeing him from the first game, so it feels like he was kind of like the owner of the mansion or something, coming back to stake its claim and its lazy boy. Besides this, there are a few changes, like instead of John Arbuckle giving hints this time, it's this duck character who always kind of unsettled me just due to how scared they look. In the same hallway as the duck person, there is a set of paintings with one large one standing out that seems to be a simple picture of some grandma's Garfield collection she had worked on for years. Once clicking on the painting, it will zoom in and the game will prompt the player to stare at the image for a few moments before a creepy ogre-like face jump scares the player exiting the screen. Yeah, that was all for a jump scare. You don't get anything out of it. Sick. Sure, it's not the spookiest jump scare online. Hell, it's not even the scariest in a Flash game. But I remember getting got by this one pretty good, and it scarred me so much that I never wanted to go back down that hallway. Your task is pretty much the same this time around, in which you need to collect an assortment of sweets with a few changes, like the fact you get to individually make a dozen chocolate donuts from the loose ones you pick up around the house. I don't know why, I always thought this was a really cool addition, being able to kind of build your own. If you're curious, yes, Lyman does make an appearance in the second game along with John Arbuckle, but in places they weren't in the first game. We could find John replace Lyman in the upstairs bathroom in the shower, whilst Lyman's head was moved from the sheet room into the kitchen, where we can find his decapitated head in the oven now. So someone thought to cook up a Lyman's head and eat it. Or perhaps this is just acting like another hiding spot for the head. Who really knows? Whatever the case, it doesn't make me trust John in this whole scenario anymore, actually, especially since we don't see a version of an alive Lyman beyond his head in this game. Maybe he truly did ascend in the last game. Along with a few more involved puzzles, like having to memorize this pattern in order to put these spiders in the same configuration. Other than that, it's mostly a souped up sequel to the first game. You leave through a hedge maze in the back of the mansion before receiving a final code to an exit gate from similar looking clown bobbleheads to the one in the mansion in the first game. I think the second game is definitely the more fun of the two, just by the fact there is a lot more to do in the game, but both serve as a creepy piece of Garfield's history and something that definitely left its mark on me as a kid. Not only that, but these games being the only solid evidence to the whereabouts of a side character like Lyman is pretty cool to look back on. I do truly wish the creator maybe took a more dark tone for Lyman's exit and used these games canonically, but it's likely he had nothing to do with these games and opted for a more peaceful exit for the character after being harassed for years about the mustached, mysterious man. These games serve as a huge piece of creepy nostalgia for my earliest days of surfing the internet, and it seems to be that way for many others as well, as the game has garnered quite a following over the years, with people even speedrunning the games, which is really cool to see. I would love to see a full-fledged version of this game wherein it's a full point-and-click adventure that takes place in several different areas, Luigi's Mansion style. I'd say it's likely impossible we'll ever see a return to Scary Scavenger Hunt, especially since its existence was purely to advertise a pastry brand that doesn't even exist anymore, but Garfield has been getting some more love in the games department recently, so maybe there is a hope for once again returning to the spooky mansion that used to haunt my dreams as a kid. But for now, until that happens, if you'd like to revel in the nostalgia of these classic scary Garfield online flash games, you can find links to both of them and play them right now in the description. They are being hosted on several different sites, so you could also Google it, but I'll warn, some of the elements from the game seem to be broken in certain versions, but the ones I've linked down below have been tested and the games fully work all the way through. So there's that. Go get yourself some sweets from the Haunted Mansion. Thanks for watching today's video. Whether you remember this game or not, I always appreciate all the support these videos get, and if you'd like to see more content like this where I take a deeper dive on a specific creepy topic, let me know that too. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.